There's always something stirring in the Mideast. And the dynamics that we see playing out every day, we see some of it on the news, but Sam, some of it we don't see in the news, do we?
No, and it's interesting. President Obama is now talking about the war in Afghanistan being on the downward trend because we're going to withdraw the troops and all this. The reality of it is...
So the way to win a war is just to leave.
Right. Well, declare you've won and leave.
Yeah.
And of course...
Or declare there isn't a war.
In Afghanistan, leave out any of the warring stuff, there is a $70 to $80 billion a year drug trade there with the opium. That has never been touched nor dealt with. We haven't solved any problems there. That's number one. Number two, there's a oil gas pipeline they want to put across the country. There are so many layers to that problem that aren't being revealed to the American public, and we're paying both in treasure and in lives.
Not only so many layers, but so many players.
Players, layers, and lies.
Yeah.
Now let's move for a moment. So that's its own mess. Now you've got Syria, and you have Assad there, who's a puppet in effect for Russia. And basically, Syria is bringing Russia and the United States. Our relations with Russia have never been as bad as they are right now for years. Because think about it, they just outed a guy at the American embassy in Russia saying he was CIA. Well, of course, we know who Russia sends here works for KGB, FSB now, and they know who we send. And occasionally there's some rough and tumble, and you need to axe a person, but you don't do it as publicly and as embarrassingly as Russia has just done. That's because they're angry. So you have this dynamic with Assad in Syria. That's now probably going to crumble. That's now spilling over into Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan. Jordan has been a very stable country pretty much for the Middle East. That's where the king is there. Then he's very pro-American, and that Jordanian royalty has been very pro-American for many years. So they're beginning to have some shakiness. And you've got Lebanon and now Turkey. At some point, Israel, who we are bound to the hip, whether you like it or not, we're bound to the hip with them. They're going to react and push back. And I say there is a very strong likelihood that we're going to end up with a significant war in the Middle East, which covers a multitude of sins. Of course, it feeds the defense contractors. And as Eisenhower said back in the early 50s, watch out for the military-industrial complex. Well, it's as big and bad now as it's ever been. And these are the people who make significant political contributions. These are the people who control the Congress and the Senate. So I say we're going to see ourselves being led into, and it's either going to be because of actions Israel takes and we get slipstreamed into it for that reason, or there's a wild card event that happens and something happens, what they call a black swan, something you're not expecting, and we're going to get drawn into a war there.
Well, if Israel is in a war,
we're in the war.
We are in the war. And frankly, we better be on the side of Israel, because if you're a student of the Scripture, it's very clear that he will bless those that bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel. For one, I'm on the side of Israel.
Well, at this point, we need to see where all this is headed, because, we have spent, 10 years and $2.5–3 trillion in the Middle East now between Iraq and Afghanistan and some of the
Yes.
North African things. We're doing all this on a Chinese MasterCard. Basically, we're borrowing money from China to conduct a war. What are we getting out of it? Leave aside the biblical thing. I'm just talking about in general. How can we afford to keep doing that?
Well, it's a little bit like a charge card. Some people get a call from the credit card company saying, sorry, you've reached your limit. Do you see that happening?
Well, not only it is happening, and here's the tough part. Because we owe China so much money, how can we possibly push back on China when they're now intruding into the South China Sea? 70% of the world's high-value trade, computers, expensive stuff, oil, goes through the South China Sea at some point or another. China is in a huge battle with Japan for control of the Senkaku Islands and some of that channel there. Well, as friendly as we are with Japan, this is where it gets really interesting because we have a mutual defense pact with China with the Japan because we wouldn't let them rearm in effect
Yes.
after World War II. Very similar to our deal with Israel, though obviously Israel is armed. But we have a similar mutual protection pact with Japan. Well, what happens if Japan and China get into it?
Well, one of the things that happens is we get another scriptural dynamic that says the borrower is servant to the lender. We may not have many choices. If we do, they won't be good ones.